Thanks for tuning in to the Women's Vibrancy Code, a podcast dedicated to helping women move from exhausted to energized, balance their hormones, and feeling turned on by their life, their lover, and themselves. I'm your host, Maraya Brown. I'm a Yale and functional medicine trained women's health expert, midwife, mom, keynote speaker, and self-made entrepreneur. I'm the founder of my signature program, the Women's Vibrancy Code. So sit back, relax, and let's chat about your energy, hormones, libido, and embracing your feminine power. Oh, and you might want to have pen and paper to take some notes on some of these episodes. Hey, Maraya Brown here, coming back to you with the Women's Vibrancy Code podcast. This is a different one. I didn't necessarily anticipate doing this podcast, but I want to talk about cervical polyps, uterine fibroids, because I just got home from my gynecological exam. I went in to go get my Pap Smear, and I came back with a cervical polyp. And for those of you that don't know, I finished my nurse practitioner training at Yale in 2007. And I specialize in women's health. I've done thousands of Pap smears. I've put in hundreds of IUDs. I've removed a cervical polyp with some support in the office before. And so I can listen to it through the lens of a women's health expert and provider. But there's also that inevitable, like, ooh, my stomach and heart just dropped. I have a cervical polyp. And so I just want to talk about it, that sensation. So for the women that are listening, like imagine this, or even for the men that are listening, this is good for you to hear, because when we go in there for our annual exams, although, now we're getting Pap smears much less often, 3, even 5 years, depending on your history and your age, I'm completely undressed in these little, doctor's office robes. When I did annual exams, I never used those stirrup foothold things. I just, women can hold their own legs for the most part. And I just would use the table and have them put their feet down. And I always keep a woman as covered as possible and empower her to move her own body. In this scenario, that was not the scenario. She's like having me bring my chin to my chest undressed while she rearranges the table and brings out the stirrups. And I'm like fully exposed and... And oh, by the way, I just shaved in a very different way. I was like, oh, right. Okay. I forgot about that. And it's cold. There were little sheepskin things on the footholds, but in this practice, they use metal speculums. Let's talk about this a little bit. For the women that are listening, when you go in for your annual exam, number one, metal speculums can be kind of cold. So you can always ask the provider, either they'll keep them warmed in the drawers of the table, or they can just run some hot water in the sink and put some warm water on the speculum. It does make a difference if it's metal. And then they put it inside my vagina, open it up so that they can visualize my cervix. So what's my cervix? What's your cervix? It's the mouth of your uterus. It's about, 3 to 4 centimeters long, feels a little bit like your nose. Okay. So the vaginal canal is not a never-ending thing. It has an end. And the cervix goes from the uterus down into the vaginal canal. And then the opening, this little tiny hole right at the opening, is called the os. And that hole goes all the way up into the uterus. But there's a couple sphincters that really are tight to make sure that nothing comes into that canal and into the uterus that's not meant to be up there. So she does my Pap. My Paps have been normal since 2010. And she says, you have a polyp. And I said, can I see it? She's like, what? And I went, right. When I was a women's health provider working in the clinic for all the years that I did, now I'm 100% online. But back then, I would always offer a woman a mirror. And yes, my friends, you too can ask for a mirror if you would like to see it. Okay. Now, she's using a metal speculum, so it's a little bit problematic. Okay. I put the mirror on the inside of my right thigh. I've got to kind of tilt my pelvis up a little bit, sit up a little bit, and she's got her headlamp, or some of them use like some type of light source behind them. They've got to tilt the light so you can get in there. If instead you're going to a place that uses plastic speculums, They're not great for the landfill, but they're clear. And usually there's this little device that goes in the base of the speculum that has a light, and it can illuminate the whole thing. So now your whole vaginal canal is like illuminated. I'll never forget the time. Oh man, I was working in a federally funded clinic with a National Health Service Corps scholarship with my first job after Yale. And I was in the middle of doing a PAP with the plastic speculum, and the little light was illuminated and the power went out in the place. And so the only light source was the light in this woman's vulva, in her vagina. We laughed about it and took the speculum out and used that as our light source to help her get dressed and get out of there because there was no light. And I was running the women's center. Anyway, I digress. Okay, so if it's a plastic speculum, it's much easier to visualize. You can literally just use the mirror and look inside. And so polyp, let's talk about polyps. Let's talk about cervical polyps, uterine polyps. First of all, just so that you all know, and I know this, and I say this to myself again, because it's good for me to hear it. They're, for the most part, always benign. They're just like these little growths, so to speak. Like a colon polyp is a little bit different. You know, if you go in for your annual colonoscopy, let's say you're supposed to have your colonoscopy every 10 years. If they've found polyps that are benign, they're going to have you come back sooner, like say every 5 years, right? For cervical polyps, for the most part, it's benign, but sometimes it can cause some spotting. It can cause some irregular bleeding. And so it is one thing for you to know if there's ever discomfort when you're having sex, if you're having irregular bleeding, spotting after sex, it could be there's a polyp because it does tend to bleed a little bit when it's touched, or the cervical tissue where the polyp is touching, when that area is touched, you can bleed. And I was going, am I having any spotting after bleeding? And I'm not. But I was able to use the mirror and look at it, and it just looks like, almost like a little tiny pink tongue coming right out of the opening of the cervix. And there's still that piece of me that's like, wow, if I was not a women's health provider, and I didn't know much about this, she drops a bomb and then she's like, yeah, so I'm going to send you over to a gynecological surgeon and okay, you're done, and walks out. That's intense. I imagine an average woman would go Google it. And the good news is I did a quick Google search before I hopped on to do this podcast. And it says in there that they're usually benign. Only 1% to 3% of them come back irregular. It's nothing to really be concerned about. And it just reminds me when we go in to see our providers and we're given a diagnosis, we're told, for instance, I had a multinodular goiter, thyroid goiter. So my thyroid enlarged after my 10-year-old was born. And then my thyroid crashed after my 8-year-old was born. And some of you know my story of this big journey when my thyroid and adrenals crashed. And I've been addressing it with a little bit of medication and a little bit of supplements and a little bit of herbs and a little bit of mindset and all of that. And then today, my thyroid just felt slightly enlarged again. It's right there in my throat, right behind your Adam's apple. And I feel like when I look in the mirror, I can see it. So I mentioned it and she felt it. And she says, yeah, let's reorder another thyroid ultrasound. And once again, I'm coming to these appointments and I'm talking to you right now, whoever's listening. If you are listening, I would love to hear from you if you have any questions. It's a lot to hear. You have an enlarged thyroid. We're going to order an ultrasound just to make sure. Dun, 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 dun. You have a cervical polyp. I'm going to send you to a gynecological surgeon just to make sure. Dun, 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 dun. Like, what do we do with this information, right? Do we go down a Dr. Google search and look up all the things that can go wrong? It's a lot. And so for those of you, if you ever have been diagnosed with a cervical polyp or a uterine polyp, it's generally nothing to worry about. It is curious. Like I go, what's going on there? Is there something so of course I'm going to do a bit of a deep dive. Is there something else that I can shift in a subtle way from an energetic standpoint, mindset, nutrition, supplementation? What is going on with the cells down there that are growing in the way that they are? And so I'm going to be in a place of self-reflection over the next month, 2 months, 6 months, however long it takes. I'll probably look up Louise Hay. What's the significance of the cervix from an energetic and emotional standpoint? Okay, for me, that all feels relevant. And for you, if you're a listener, if you're a husband, if you're a partner, if you're a mother, if you're a dad and you've had a good friend and they've said, I was diagnosed with a cervical polyp, I want you to know it's nothing to be super alarmed by. It is curious. Like, why is the body creating these extra cells? They're generally always benign, but they can cause some strange bleeding, okay? Now, uterine fibroids, I think while I'm here talking, I might as well talk a little bit about that. Uterine fibroids are also benign, but they're growing inside the uterus. They're also known as myometriums. Myomas, is that what they're called? I think myomas. And when I think about uterine fibroids, mainstream medicine will say it's just a completely benign mass or growth. For some reason, it's more common in women after 30, and particularly women of African American descent. For some reason, Black women are more likely to develop uterine fibroids. I don't really know why. But what we do know, and what I've learned by doing a deep dive through the Institute of Functional Medicine and learning outside of my mainstream kind of allopathic training, for decades, I've done this deep dive into nutrition and supplementation and looking underneath the hood from a more holistic standpoint, from a functional medicine lens. When it comes to uterine fibroids, I do think of estrogen dominance. For some reason, for women who drink alcohol or caffeine, that enlarges the uterine fibroids. And if they take out alcohol and caffeine, it tends to decrease the size of the fibroids. Fascinating. Endocrine disruptors are a relevant conversation in the realm of estrogen dominance. Okay. Sleep is significant for progesterone production. So it's not just necessarily that the estrogen is high, but the estrogen is high in comparison to the progesterone. And so mainly I just wanted to leave this message while I feel kind of emotionally raw and I come home and have the conversation with my husband. I step away from the kids' ears because I don't want them to have to hear that something might be going on with mom and, for them to worry. I don't want my husband to worry, but it is something like, all right, here we go. I'm going to be referred to a gynecological surgeon. They will remove the polyps. I'm sure that they'll use some local anesthesia, but even the injection of that anesthesia is crampy a little bit. And when they remove the polyps, there might be some bleeding. There probably will be some bleeding. It probably will be pretty crampy, not the most comfortable. I mean, first of all, let's call a spade a spade. It's not comfortable to lay on that table with cold thing up inside me with some stranger and I'm not dressed and all of that. Not to mention to have something surgically removed and sent away to pathology. I'm sure it will be benign, but still it's a journey. I'm a very healthy individual. I really take care of myself and I pride myself in taking care of myself, and I'm 45. At some point I have to address that I'm not going to live forever and I'm not going there. It's not like I'm thinking about doomsday or my mortality necessarily, but it is one of those scenarios of, one day I might come home with a diagnosis, some words from a provider that don't sit well. And what do I do with this? Right? So for me personally, I take a deep breath. I go to a place of trust. I know that my body's spectacular and heals quickly. And I have to ask myself the questions. All right, why body? Why are you doing this? Why that part of the body? Actually, I'm going to do a quick Google search. Let's look it up. Wait 1 second, please. I'm looking up Louise Hay, significance of the cervix. Let's see. Okay, so the cool thing about looking this up is you can look up bleeding and bleeding gums and bones and breasts. Let's see if she has cervix in there. She does not have the cervix. Louise, you've left this planet. I need you. What would she say about the significance of the cervix? Let's look up polyp. Let's see what Louise Hay would say about polyp. Nope. Nothing, at least on this site, that I'm seeing for polyp. Guess I could look up uterus, but it's not. That's not really what I'm looking for. Let's see what she says about uterus. Uterus represents the home of creativity. Okay, so I can go there a little bit. The cervix is the mouth of my uterus, and it represents the home of creativity. So I take a deep breath and I go, all right, in what way am I not totally and completely honoring my creativity? Is my creativity being fully expressed? Is it being expressed in a direction that I don't necessarily resonate with? And I don't know. I think I'm just going to need to spend some time thinking about this. But while it was real and true for me, I just wanted to bring it. Let's call a spade a spade. For those of you that have gone in and been told something by your provider, and then they walk out the room for you to get dressed again, and you're left with more questions than answers. What do we do with this information, right? Hopefully you have resources that you trust. You're obviously welcome to reach out to me. You're welcome to come in the Facebook world. I have a couple Facebook groups. One is called Beyond the Red Tent. The other one is called Women Rockin' Their Energy, Hormones, and Libido. Come into Facebook, come join those groups. Ask these questions, share your experience, and know that your body has a spectacular potential to heal. Now I'll go to the gynecological surgeon and I'll have this bugger removed, and I'll trust that it's going to be completely gone, and the cervix will get the message that it can grow and transition in different ways. It doesn't need to create polyps, but also for me to think about what's going on there. Is there anything else that I can change? And right now, I can't think of anything, but I do know that my health is important to me. And my empowerment is important to me. For me to have walked out of there not seeing it with my own eyes, I think would have been much more difficult. For me to have been able to look at it with the mirror, especially as a women's health provider, but even for anyone listening, you can ask. You can say, I don't want to put my feet in those footholds. Can I just keep my feet on the table? Right? You can say, I would like to look. You can ask the additional questions. And I hope that you are in a place of real self-advocacy and speaking your truth, and also allowing yourself to go through the feels. Do I feel nervous? Do I feel scared? There's a little bit of that, but it's quick. It's fleeting. It's going to be okay, particularly in this scenario. So, uterine fibroids, cervical polyps, uterine polyps, not something necessarily to be concerned about. Uterine fibroids, they are going to cause some excess bleeding, usually some pain. Sometimes they can get in the way of your ability to get pregnant or maintain a pregnancy. Relevant. And then when I think about uterine fibroids, I'm thinking estrogen dominance. So then I go, I wonder if cervical polyps might have anything to do with estrogen dominance. I don't know. I've never heard of that. And I don't have elevated estrogen that I know of, but I am taking Praeria mirifica and DHEA. So I'm just in a place of, let me share this with the world while I'm in it and feeling the feels and trusting that if I learn anything, I will bring it to you as the listeners, as part of my community. And I'm appreciative of you staying in this space, and really, truly invite you to reach out. Email is maraya@marayabrown.com. Instagram is _Maraya Brown _. Facebook is Maraya Brown. I am on TikTok and LinkedIn and YouTube and Pinterest, but I don't really go there very often. So those are not ways to reach out to me on this day that I'm recording this message. All right. I think I'm good. I think y'all are awesome. Thank you for listening in. I don't necessarily have solutions today. This is more just a share to go, here's what's up for me. With that, let me read a review, because I'm having so much fun doing this. This one is from Nancy McCarter. Nancy, she says, grateful and happy to enjoy this. And then it's cut off. And she said, it's so fascinating. She gave a 1 star, but when I read it, I know she meant to give a 5 star. She just clicked the wrong button. So for those of you looking at my star ratings, they're 4.9, and there's one rating that's a 1, but really it's Nancy, and she meant to give a 5. She says, I have seen layers of the onion peeling off in my mind. I don't have as much anxiety, but I'm finding a bit of my passion and purpose. Maraya helps us see it, just so that you know, she not only has listened to my podcast, but she's also been in my internal space with my programs and courses. So she's sharing from that perspective too. She wants to help us with those things that concern us as individuals. I'm having success in areas that were often stressful. From removing certain items from my diet, such as gluten and foods that do not serve us well, making healthy a priority, and knowing how to make the gut happy. These are just a few of the amazing things shared. Maraya is so incredibly smart, fun, and beautiful. She definitely deserves a 5-star rating, but she gave a 1 star. So Nancy, thank you so much. I received that. It makes my whole body feel good and happy to read it. And I'm so grateful for the time that we got to spend together. Thank you for letting me in to support you. For others that are curious about what that looks like, for you to let me in to support you, I encourage you to come over to marayabrown.com, look at the links in the show notes, find me, reach out to me. I am offering some clarity calls so you can apply for one of those calls. I have a number of different courses. I have a year-long program. I have a VIP program for one-on-one. There, I do in-person women's retreats. Often I'll host workshops and women's circles that are completely free. And I do Facebook Lives often. And I have the YouTube channel. So if you're having fun on the podcast, you might want to check out Maraya Brown and over in YouTube and just continue to consume whatever it is that I'm offering up. I'm grateful that you're consuming it. I'm grateful that you're asking yourself the questions. I'm grateful that you're open to acknowledging that you are a multidisciplinary, dynamic, ever-changing, beautiful being. It's not just a prescription. It's not just your nutrition. It's not just your supplementation. It's not just your mindset. It's not just your trauma release. It's not just your energy. It's not just your prayer. It's not just your relationships. It's not just your sex. It's not just your orgasm. It's all of it. It's all of it. It's all relevant. It's all important. And you're relevant and you're important. And so am I. And so with that, thank you for listening in. Until next time, I wish you well. Thanks for listening to the show today. I know you have lots of choices and live a very productive life, as we all do. I appreciate that you've allowed me to dive deep in your journey of feeling turned on by your life, your lover, and yourself. I trust you learned something, expanded your self-reflection, and you're grateful we shared this time together. Connect with me at www.thewomensvibrancycode.com or on all social media platforms and YouTube by searching for Maraya Brown, Maraya Brown. Lastly, if you've found value in what we chatted about in this episode, please consider leaving me a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice. It helps others discover the podcast and get a feeling for the wonderful community we've all created together. As for now, I'm Maraya Brown, and you've been listening to the Women's Vibrancy Code.